What if every bone ever buried wasn't just a fossil, but a voice still speaking beneath the weight of time? What if, in the deep silence of forgotten caves and windswept valleys, there are whispers not lost, but waiting for someone to listen, someone to remember? Long before cities rose from stone, before empires drew borders into earth and sky, there were men and women who walked this world barefoot, their feet pressed into cold soil, their hands shaped flint with purpose, their eyes turned upward to the same stars we still see tonight. They built no kingdoms, they wrote no books, and yet they endured. The Neanderthals were not shadows. They were not myths. They were people mothers, hunters, children, elders. And though their names are lost, their presence remains. Their story is not written in ink, but in bone. And that the map of their lives is still here, buried beneath us, whispering through time, waiting for us to read it. For more than 100 years, the word Neanderthal has echoed through classrooms, textbooks, and museum hall stew, often as a slur, a symbol of ignorance, a primitive other, brutes, cavemen. Slow, simple, lost to time. But every excavation, every dusty dig beneath ancient soil tells a different story. They were not mindless. They controlled fire, shaping the night. They buried their dead with care, not out of instinct, but meaning. They nursed the injured, the elderly, the fragile, when they could have left them behind. And maybe they remembered, not just tools or tasks, but each other. From the rugged cliffs of Gibraltar to the ice-laced margins of Siberia, their legacy stretches like a trail mapped, not in ink, but in stone, in ash, and in silence. This is not the trace of an extinct species. It is the quiet outline of a people whose echoes still live beneath our feet and within our blood. At the far southern edge of Europe, where the limestone cliffs of Gibraltar stare across the narrow blue into North Africa, there lies a cave carved, not by hands, but by time and sea. Gorham's Cave, a place that, long ago, may have marked the very edge of the Neanderthal world. Imagine it, a fire flickering against the stone walls, the crashing tide echoing in the distance, the smell of salt and smoke blending in the air. This was not merely a shelter, it was a home, a last refuge, perhaps even a final stand. Archaeologists have uncovered hearths blackened with ancient soot, stone tools worn from use, and then something unexpected etched into the wall. Beneath the soot and sediment, a geometric pattern. Not random, not accidental. A deliberate cross-hatched engraving carved deep into the rock. To some, it looks like art. To others, like ritual. But to all, it speaks of something deeper. Abstraction. Intent. A mind that could imagine what wasn't there. A Neanderthal who didn't just react to the world, but who paused and considered it. Think about that. The idea that some perhaps 40,000 years ago knelt in the dim firelight and carved lines into the wall, not to survive, but to express. That moment turns everything we thought we knew on its head. Gorham's Cave is not a relic. It is a reminder. At the literal edge of their world, the Neanderthals didn't just fight to stay alive. They looked inward. They questioned. They marked their presence. And in doing so, they reached across time. This cave still opens to the sea. The wind still moves through it. And if you stand there today, as the waves crash and the stone cools beneath your feet, you can almost feel them, those who once looked out from the same darkness into the same unknowable horizon. At Gibraltar, we do not find the end of a species. We find the memory of a people who, even as their world narrowed, left behind proof that they were thinking, feeling, and fully human. In the quiet countryside of southwestern France, near the village of La Chapelle-aux-Saints, a grave was found. Not a modern one, but ancient, dug tens of thousands of years ago. Inside, curled like someone laid to rest with care, were the bones of an old Neanderthal man. His skeleton told a silent story. His spine was hunched, his hips worn down, his joints thick with arthritis. He had lost most of his teeth, making it nearly impossible for him to chew solid food. By every evolutionary measure, he should not have survived. And yet, he did. For years. Which means one thing. Someone fed him. Someone brought him water. Someone waited as he limped behind. Someone sat with him, near the fire. This old man, long past the age of hunting, building, or child-rearing, was not cast aside. He was cared for. He was kept. And that one quiet fact changes everything. Because it means the Neanderthals were not a tribe of beasts, governed only by survival. They were a people who recognized frailty not as a weakness, but as something sacred. A people who saw value beyond productivity, dignity beyond strength. Perhaps he was a grandfather. Perhaps he told stories. Or perhaps his presence alone reminded the younger ones that they, too, would one day grow old and hope not to be forgotten. The grave itself was deliberate, tucked into a shallow depression in the earth, then covered with sediment. No animal dragged him there. No natural erosion explains the position. He was placed there intentionally, reverently. We sometimes imagine the prehistoric world as brutal, merciless. But this grave at La Chapelle-aux-Saints suggests another truth, that even before history, there was empathy. That, long before modern medicine, there was compassion. That before the written word, there was memory and the will to honor it. In the bones of this old man, we glimpse not extinction, but humanity. And in the hands that buried him, we find our own. Deep in the Zagros Mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan lies a cave known as Shanidar. It is not a place of grand architecture or polished monuments, just stone, shadow, and silence. And yet, within that darkness, something was left behind, something almost impossibly tender. In the 1960s, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a Neanderthal man, now known as Shanidar IV. But it wasn't the skeleton that stunned the world. It was what surrounded him. Traces of pollen from wildflowers, scattered in the soil around his body. Yarrow, cornflower, hyacinth. They were not simply blown in by chance. The pollen was concentrated, deliberate, placed, not drifted. And so the question arose, had someone laid flowers beside him? Had they marked his passing with beauty? If so, then what does that mean? Because flowers are not about survival. They feed no one. They shelter nothing. To place flowers beside the dead is to feel something deeper, something ineffable. Grief, reverence, love. Could it be that the first funeral was not ours? That long before modern Homo sapiens painted myths on the walls of cathedrals, Neanderthals were already honoring the sacred act of saying goodbye? Science debates the certainty. Was it a ritual or coincidence? Were the flowers intentional or simply natural contamination? But the soil is hard to ignore. And the gesture, whether accidental or ancestralingers in the imagination. For generations, we believed we invented emotion. That grief was modern. That love belonged to us. But what if we only inherited it? What if compassion has deeper roots reaching back into the Pleistocene? The cave at Shanidar doesn't just contain bones. It contains a message that the Neanderthals were not numb to death. They felt its weight. They responded with beauty. They didn't just die. They mourned. And in doing so, they remind us that what makes us human did not begin with civilization, or writing, or religion. It began in the quietest places with a hand laying down flowers, with someone refusing to let another go unnoticed. Far from the warmth of Europe and deep into the cold silence of southern Siberia, there is a cave few have ever heard of, Chagirskaya. Tucked away in the Altai Mountains, beyond forests and frozen rivers, it is not a place where you would expect to find echoes of ancient humanity. And yet, those echoes are there etched in stone, buried in ice, whispering beneath the permafrost. Among the finds at Chagirskaya Cave are Mousterian tools, finely shaped blades, scrapers, and points. These weren't crude objects hammered by chance. They were crafted with care and intention, shaped to fit the hand, to meet specific needs. Each tells us that those who made them knew what they were doing, and that they carried a legacy of knowledge passed down through time. But one find stands out. Just a single broken thumb bone. Small, almost unnoticeable. It belonged to a young Neanderthal girl. Her people had come here far east of the traditional Neanderthal range. And in doing so, they shattered our assumptions. Because for decades, we believed the Neanderthals were bound to Europe, that they were creatures of the West. But Chagirskaya rewrites the map. It tells us they were explorers, survivors, trailblazers. They didn't simply cling to what they knew. They adapted. They ventured into new lands, faced brutal winters, hunted in unfamiliar terrain, and they remembered who they were while doing it. The artifacts here suggest a cultural connection to Western Neanderthal groups, meaning these people traveled far, carried tradition, brought tools, language, perhaps even stories, across thousands of miles. What drove them? Hunger? Curiosity? Hope? The answer may never be certain, but the evidence is clear. Chagirskaya was not an accident. It was a destination, a reach, a statement. That even in the face of extinction, the Neanderthals were not fading passively. They pushed forward. They found new places. And they left their mark not just in fossils, but in the resilience of their actions. Chagirskaya is not just a cold cave. It is a monument to movement, a chapter in a story too often told as an ending, when in truth, it was still unfolding. There is a cave in the heart of Croatia, humble, unassuming, tucked into the limestone of northern Europe, not far from the village of Donja Voća. It's called Venezia. And though it lacks the monumental grandeur of other archaeological sites, what it gave us was nothing short of revolutionary. Not a tool, not a bone, but a whisper written in the very code of life. DNA. From the crushed remains of a Neanderthal's thigh bone, scientists extracted the first full genome of a species long thought lost to time. What they discovered changed the story of who we are. Because the Neanderthals are not gone. Their faces may not walk beside us in the street. Their languages may not be spoken aloud, but their legacy quiet, persistent lives on inside us, in our blood, in our cells, in the curled double helix that defines who we are. If you are of European or Asian descent, it is almost certain that you carry Neanderthal DNA. A small percentage, yes, but meaningful. Not as an evolutionary footnote, not as a contaminant, but as family. The story of our species is not a clean break. It is not one lineage replacing another like pages turning in a book. It is a tapestry woven from threads of contact, curiosity, and sometimes love. At some point, our ancestors did not just meet the Neanderthals. They lived with them, traveled beside them, shared fire, shared food, shared flesh. The DNA tells us this was no singular event. It happened many times, in many places, over thousands of years. Each union left behind a quiet, genetic echoon that still sings in us today. Some of those echoes may influence our immune systems. Some may shape how we respond to altitude or cold. Others may play subtle roles in our metabolism, our sleep, even how we dream. We are still deciphering the code, still learning what parts of us carry the breath of another people. But what is certain is this: the boundary between us and them was never as firm as we once believed. The bones of India didn't just tell us about the past. They collapsed the wall between past and present, between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. And in doing so, they reminded us that the human story is not a single lineage, it's a family tree with branches that once intertwined. So, the next time you look in the mirror, understand. You may carry the storm-weathered strength of a Neanderthal, their endurance, their memory, their voice still alive, still whispering inside your own. High in the Altai mountains of Siberia lies a cave that once seemed like just another wound in the earth. But Denisova is no ordinary site. It is a crossroads, not of roads, but of blood. Not of kingdoms, but of species. Within its cold walls, fragments of a young girl's finger bone, a molar, and later a toe would force scientists to redraw the entire human family tree. These were not Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, but something else, Denisovans, a people we never knew existed until their DNA whispered the truth. And that whisper was deafening. From one bone came a revelation. The girl was a hybrid, half Neanderthal, half Denisovan. Two ancient lineages, thought separate, converging in one child. It wasn't conquest. It was connection. Proof that these human sewer cousins did not just pass each other like ships in the night. They saw one another. They touched. They bore children. And in doing so, they etched their legacy into us. Genetic traces of Denisovans stretch astonishingly far from Siberia to the islands of Southeast Asia and deep into the genomes of Melanesian and Aboriginal Australian peoples. How did their blood travel so far? Were they seafarers? Did they traverse the highlands and archipelagos in ways we still do not understand? The mystery is not just biological, it is cultural, spiritual. Every bone unearthed in Denisova points to a people with tools as refined as any Neanderthal, with bracelets carved from polished green stone, hinting at beauty, perhaps even ceremony. This cave, silent now, once echoed with life, language, and laughter that no longer exists, or so we thought. But the boundaries between us and them are far thinner than we imagined. We carry not just Neanderthal blood, but Denisovan too, a layered inheritance of shadowed ancestries, complex and intertwined. In the darkness of Denisova Cave, the human story becomes messy, but it also becomes beautiful, because evolution is not a ladder, it is a web. And at its heart is connection. Between peoples, between genes, between dreams left behind in the dust and those still written in our breath. In the limestone hills of southern Greece, tucked within a quiet cliff that gazes out over the Aegean Sea, lies a cavern called Opidema. On the surface, it seems unremarkable, a windswept rock hollowed by time. But hidden in its shadows was a skull fragment that would send tremors through the timeline of our species. Found decades ago, it gathered dust in a museum drawer until new technology uncovered a haunting truth. This was not a Neanderthal. It was us, Homo sapiens, in Europe, over 210,000 years ago. Twice as old as the famous wave of migration out of Africa, older than any other known Homo sapiens fossil found on the continent. This skull, Apodema 1, shattered a comforting narrative that we left Africa once, around 60,000 years ago, in a great forward march toward global dominance. But the bones say otherwise. We were here before. We came, we explored, we vanished, and we forgot. Or rather, we forgot until now. The skull is curved in a way only ours is rounded at the back, lacking the elongated shape of Neanderthals. Yet nearby, in the same cave, Apodema 2 tells another story. A Neanderthal skull, younger. It suggests a relay of presence, our kind first, then theirs. As if we had made a tentative claim, only to lose it, overtaken by a more established cousin. Why did we disappear? Was it the climate? Competition? A path not taken? Apodema doesn't answer those questions, but it forces us to ask better ones. How many times did humans leave Africa? How many waves broke against the shores of Europe and Asia, only to retreat, forgotten by memory, but not by stone? These ghosts, these quiet fragments of who we were, haunt not because they are frightening, but because they are familiar. Apodema is a reminder that history is not a straight line. It loops, it branches, it circles back in quiet revolutions. The face we wear today is not the only one we've ever worn. And the path that led us here is not paved in certainty, but in lost footsteps, washed by time. So when we look at Apodema, we don't just see a fossil. We see a question. How much of our story lies buried not in the earth, but in the blind spots of our own assumptions? And more importantly, who else came before us and vanished before we even learned to remember? They left no scrolls, no parchment marked with red trails and black lines, no compass etched into bark, no symbols carved to guide future travelers. Unlike Homo sapiens, the Neanderthals never drew maps, at least, not in the way we understand them, but still, their trail remains. If you look closely, the land remembers. Their journey is inscribed not in ink, but in earth and silence. Each cave they entered, each ridge they crossed, every shelter they carved beneath limestone cliffsall are points on a forgotten map. Their map. It stretches from the windy coasts of Portugal to the icy shadows of Siberia, from the sun-bleached hills of Israel to the dark pine forests of Germany. And beneath it all, memory. They did not build empires. They did not mark territory with stone walls or towers, but they knew the rhythms of the land. They followed migrations, remembered where the game passed and the snow melted first. They returned to sacred places, the good caves, the warm overhangs, the rivers that never ran dry. These memories were not written, they were lived, passed not through words, but through practice, through presence. A son learning from a father where to find flint, a mother teaching her daughter how to smell rain in the wind. A people shaped by the land, and in turn, shaping it with quiet knowledge. Their map was not one of conquest, but of continuity, not drawn by rulers, but traced by survival. And now, as we uncover the bones and the ash, the tools and the hearths, we begin to read it line by unspoken line. Why did we assume they were brutish? Why did we cast them as backward, slow, even monstrous? For more than a century, the Neanderthal was our favorite villain in the story of evolution, a primitive cousin we conquered and outsmarted. But those assumptions weren't born from evidence. They were born from ego. Early reconstructions didn't just misread bones, they distorted them. A skeleton found with severe arthritis was reassembled, hunched and grimacing, and suddenly, all Neanderthals became stooped cavemen. Artists, guided by colonial imagination more than anatomical truth, painted them as hairy, wild-eyed, and dull. And so the myth spread. We were the chosen, and they were the failed. But science, when honest grows, it corrects. Over decades, new excavations and better methods have stripped away the lies. CT scans, DNA, where patterns on tools, the soot of ancient fire saw whisper another truth. These people were not slow. They were skilled, not mindless, but mindful. They cared for their elderly. They buried their dead. They made tools that required foresight and memory. What we see now is not a species left behind, but a people once beside us. And when we stop seeing them as lesser, we begin to see what matters most: kinship. For in their eyes, if we could see them, we might just find a flicker of our own. They did not disappear in a single moment. There was no great war, no final battle carved into rock or echoed in legend. The Neanderthals faded like a breath in winter slowly, invisibly, across centuries. Some were absorbed into the tide of Homo sapiens, their bloodlines carried forward in silence. Others may have watched the last fire burn low in caves no one returned to. They dwindled not from weakness, but from circumstance. In some hidden valleys, Homo sapiens never arrived. There was no clash, no violence, just silence. A generation without enough children, a winter too long, a wound that didn't heal. No extinction eventually, quiet absence, like a candle that flickers once, then goes dark. But bones remain, and bones remember. They lie curled beneath layers of earth, untouched for tens of thousands of years, whispering through fractures and ash. They speak not of defeat, but of existence of the time before we claimed the world alone. In their stillness they testify, we were here. We lived. We loved. We mattered. And within us, their voice continues, in our DNA, in our memory, in our shadows. The Neanderthals never built monuments, but perhaps their truest monument is us. This etched not in ink, but in ash, and bone matters because it is not only theirs, it is ours. It tells the story not just of Neanderthals, but of what it means to be human across time. To migrate, to make shelter, to tend to the fallen, to survive winters of the body and the soul. The Neanderthals were never a failed experiment. They were a version, a possibility, a voice in the choir of humanity, now quiet but never erased. We did not replace them. We followed them. Sometimes we met. Sometimes we blended. Sometimes we simply shared the same wind-swept path. And as we map their steps across the world, we trace our own origins not just in DNA, but in spirit. Because every fire we light, every hand we hold in mourning, every story we pass down around quiet hearths carries something of them. To know them is not to mourn extinction, it is to reclaim connection. They remind us that strength is not only in building empires, but in tenderness. That meaning is not only in invention, but in memory. That to be human is not to dominate, but to endure, to wander, to love, and to remember. This map matters because it still leads us to empathy, to understanding, and maybe to a deeper respect for the long shadow we all share. Somewhere deep beneath the forest floor, beneath layers of time and silence, a child's femur lies beside a stone shaped by careful hands. In another forgotten chamber, ochre dust still clings to the hollow where a body once rested. These are not artifacts for museum shelves. These are voices whispering not just of death, but of life, of tenderness, of meaning. They are not lost. They are waiting. And if we are quiet enough, we can still hear them. They speak of a world before ours, a people who walked this earth not as myths or monsters, but as kin. To hear them is to remember that we are not alone in the story of humanity. We never were. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows, where ancient footsteps echo, memory is rekindled, and the past finds its voice once more. At Prehistoric Shadows, we don't just study bones, we listen to them. Because before there was history, there was story, and it still lives in you.